We begin with breaking news. Pharmaceuticals giant Pfizer has announced that its anti-coronavirus vaccine, developed in partnership with German company BioNTech, is 90% effective. The two companies are the first to show successful data from a large-scale trial of such a vaccine. Pfizer and BioNTech say they've found no serious safety concerns and expect to seek authorization for emergency use in the United States this month. So let's explore this with Tobias Kurt, who's an epidemiologist at Berlin Charité Hospital. Welcome to DW. How significant do you feel this news is?
Well, I think this is a significant step, and we know that several companies are working on vaccines, and we were hoping to hear this news soon. And so today we heard the news. However, we have to understand this is an interim analysis, so this is not the end of the trial that is currently still ongoing, and it's a press release. So we have not seen the data in detail, but we are very positive that this data holds true and that a lot of people who are vaccinated are protected from getting corona.
So are you able to see from the details that have been released so far, have you been able to see what it is 90% effective at doing and for how long?
As far as I understand, there were 2 vaccinations necessary, and after these 2 vaccinations, a certain number of people still get sick, so 90% doesn't mean that everyone is protected. But from the people who are participating in the trial, 90% did not get COVID after 2 vaccinations. But again, this is an interim analysis and more data are coming in.
Right. These results, as you say, these are results from trials. So what now has to happen successfully before any vaccine can be rolled out?
Well, we need to wait until the closure of the trial. We also need to follow very carefully the safety information, which you already mentioned. So far, there do not seem to be concerns about safety. And then we have to see when the vaccine is rolled out that we follow people who have been vaccinated to really see whether any issues occur. And we also have to understand that when the drug is released to the market, that not suddenly the problem is solved, because people need to get vaccinated, and not everyone will have the vaccination in the first days or weeks or potentially even months.
Now, this vaccine uses a new technology called messenger RNA technology. I wonder if you could explain that to us in simple terms.
Yes, so what you take, you do not take the virus or an antigen, you take messenger RNA from the antigen of the virus and inject that to the body, and the immune system cells are taking this messenger RNA inside of the cell and then producing the antigen on the surface of the cell, and by that attacking the virus. So this is a very neat way of a vaccine. Important also is that there are very different ways of vaccines currently produced. So if this is not working for everyone, then maybe the other ones are working for those in which this vaccine is not working.
Vaccines often take upwards of 10 years to be developed, yet here we are not even a year into this pandemic. What corners will have been cut? What will not have been done that usually gets done to get a vaccine this far, this fast?
Yes, COVID-19 is new, but the coronavirus isn't. So this is not like we're developing a drug with absolutely no information before. So there have been some work before, and that was the reason why the companies are able now so fast to actually find a potential solution to produce a vaccine. So what we have to follow is really to see what's happening on the population level. Is it really as effective as in the trials, and are the side effects or not?
So are there concerns about potential adverse long-term reactions to the anti-COVID drugs being developed just because this development process has been so contracted?
I think that everyone's working very carefully, and specifically we are concerned about safety, and so this information is really collected very carefully. We also know from other vaccines that there are no major side effects, and the long-term consequences obviously we know in a couple of years, but taking together all the information from other vaccines, I do not expect any major consequences. In particular now what we know from the trial, short-term side effects are not expected.
So given what we've heard, and I appreciate you say it was a press release, is this a vaccine you would take?
I would take this vaccine if offered to me. Again, I would like to see the data before, but this data will be released, I'm sure. And the officials in the United States, as well as in Europe, are very carefully looking at this data before it's actually released to the public. So many people are looking at this very carefully, and no one has an interest that something is released which will cause side effects or any issues. We hope to solve the issue of COVID, to solve the issue of the pandemic, and hopefully that we are slowly getting back to a life that maybe not what we used to live, but certainly without a fear of a massive pandemic wave.
Good talking to you. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Tobias Kurt from Berlin's Charité Hospital.
Thank you for having me.
Millions of doses could be ready by the end of the year. Still, the experimental vaccine is not the only one being developed. There are about 200 of them. Around 40 are in clinical trials, and there are different methods being used to make them.
Various kinds of vaccine for coronavirus are in development. One kind is an inactivated virus vaccine that uses proteins from the virus. To create the vaccine, viruses first have to be broken down into parts, and their infectivity has to be destroyed so it's no longer dangerous. But it still has to provoke an immune response in the recipient so that the immune system develops antibodies to it. So what are the advantages and disadvantages?
This approach is well established. Companies that develop and manufacture vaccines are familiar with it, and the production processes have been perfected. That's certainly an advantage. The disadvantage is that it takes time to grow the underlying virus in large amounts if more is needed.
A viral vector vaccine uses a harmless live virus of a different kind as a carrier to transport genes from the dangerous virus into cells in the recipient's body. A protein gene from the bad virus is first added to the benign one. In the case of the novel coronavirus, it's a spike protein gene. The modified virus then resembles SARS-CoV-2 in one key respect. The immune system detects the offending protein and creates antibodies in response.
The safety requirements for growing the virus are not as strict as with inactivated whole virus vaccines. Disadvantages are that it takes a lot of time, and you have to choose vectors that are not affected by any pre-existing immune response capability.
Then there are vaccines that use messenger RNA. For the novel coronavirus, it is mRNA with instructions for making its spike proteins. Such vaccines prompt cells in the recipient to make such proteins themselves, which in turn provoke an immune response. Although these proteins are not dangerous, they are still identified as enemies by the immune system, which then creates antibodies and thus immunity.
One advantage is that the safety requirements are much less stringent. Another is that you can modify the RNA quite quickly. Manufacturers say that within a short period of time, perhaps 6 weeks, RNA vaccines can be produced in very large volumes, millions of units. You can't match that with vector, whole virus, or other kinds of vaccine.
So each of these approaches has upsides and downsides. Nonetheless, they're all considered worth pursuing. It is likely that we need more than one vaccine.
Anna Blakeney is a bioengineer and joins us from London. What's the problem here, Anna, if we totally rely on one or more vaccines coming along to solve this crisis?
Yeah, so really, we have a lot of different tools that we can use to fight this pandemic. So, if you were being approached by a swarm of mosquitoes and you had the choice to use a net, a fly swatter, and bug spray or something, you wouldn't choose to use just one of them. So in addition to vaccines and the many different vaccines that we might have available, you want to also be using masks and public health measures like social distancing as well.
Even if we do get a vaccine or more vaccines at some stage soon, I hope, it's not going to be an immediate fix, is it?
No, no, definitely not. So it will take some time to roll it out to the population. But even when you receive a vaccine, depending on the type of vaccine, it can take anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks to induce immunity. So there's still a little bit of a lag time.
And there are a lot of people out there who aren't going to want to take that vaccine or those vaccines. How has misinformation on vaccines made your job difficult?
Yeah, so we often view it as people that are pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine, and I really think it's kind of a gray area in between. So I'm part of a new team called Team Halo, which is an initiative to connect scientists working on COVID-19 vaccines directly to the public, and we do this through TikTok. So we're able to make videos about how we make vaccines, how we test them, and then be there to answer any questions that people have. So it's a really great way to connect with people who are skeptical or critical. And, you know, I don't really think that's a bad thing. As scientists, we're taught to be critical until we see the data. And often the public isn't, proxy to that data or doesn't know how to interpret it. And so it's great to be able to connect and have actual conversations with people.
And you're making all of this process transparent, which is important. I'd like to know where all the misinformation on vaccines actually comes from.
I think it's just in general, you know, there might not be a lot of people that are educated on vaccines or how they work. And so when stuff starts to kind of just stew in the internet, there a lot of rumors fly around, and, you know, sometimes people just don't know what to trust anymore. So we're there to kind of improve that trust and just be a direct source where you can ask questions and get an honest answer from a scientist.
And honestly, Anna, can you answer this one or try to answer this last question? Once we get consensus, once we do have vaccines and people taking them, when could things start returning to normal?
Yeah, that's a really hard question to answer. So I think based off of some of the trials that are really in kind of the final phases in phase 3 of their clinical trials right now, those are looking promising. So I think we might actually have vaccines possibly by the end of this year, early next year. But yeah, it's really hard to say worldwide how we'll be able to distribute those and kind of return to a normal society. So yeah, I'm hoping for early next year, but I'm also just cautiously optimistic.
Fingers crossed. Bioengineer Anna Blakeney, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Your questions now on the coronavirus. Keep sending them in to our YouTube channel, and DW science correspondent Derek Williams will take care of the rest.
Can you tell us more about the BCG vaccine clinical trial that's currently underway?
Well, there are a few studies looking at this, but I think the one that you're talking about, which has received the most media coverage, is called the BRACE trial. It's being conducted in several countries across the globe. It involves around 10,000 volunteers, many of them healthcare workers. But before we go any further, I need to provide a little more background. The BCG vaccine, which has been around for close to a century, is usually associated with tuberculosis prevention, though it also appears to help prevent or at least reduce the deadliness of a range of other infections. The theory is that the BCG vaccine is sort of a generalist vaccine that helps strengthen the immune response to many respiratory diseases by enhancing your innate immunity. However, it's no longer widely given in countries where TB has grown rare. But in countries where it's still endemic and the BCG vaccine is still common, there are lots of studies showing that it impacts things like child mortality rates. And many of those same countries also appear to have lower mortality rates in the COVID-19 pandemic. The problem is that it's hard to show that the BCG vaccine is maybe one reason why, because a lot of other factors could also be playing a role. It's kind of hard to filter out all of the noise. And that's what the BRACE trial is trying to do in a systematic way. And if we don't have a more specific targeted COVID-19 vaccine soon, and the study shows that the BCG vaccine does indeed help lower COVID-19 transmission or severity, it could one day be seen as a kind of stopgap tool in the pandemic. But that's still a big if.
Well, policymakers in Germany are already grappling with who will be first in line for a successful vaccine. There won't initially be enough to inoculate the population of more than 80 million. Health Minister Jens Spahn is calling for a rigorous public debate.
What's important, what's also important to me personally, is that this debate is not only a parliamentary, political, and not only a scientific one, but that we take this discussion to every lunch table, to every workplace, to every circle of friends and acquaintances, and that it is discussed in Germany. In the end, it needs a high level of acceptance.
Well, let's bring in DW political correspondent Nina Haaser on this. Are you there, Nina?
I'm here, yeah.
Right, there you are. I hear you, but I don't see you. OK, so what are the recommendations that the Health Minister is considering?
Well, as we heard, and with today's news, obviously, it's looking increasingly likely that Germany access to a vaccine against this sort of the coronavirus pretty soon. The government is actually hoping maybe end of the year or spring next year. But Jens Spahn called the news of Pfizer and BioNTech with their news that the vaccine that they're developing, that it is effective, very encouraging. But what's already clear is that there will not be enough initially for everybody straight away, which is why the government and its agencies are trying to prepare the German population that there will have to be priority groups. And Jens Spahn set up a commission to discuss these questions. And as we heard, he wants this discussion to happen nationwide so that there is maximum consent with the strategy once the vaccine is actually there. And the idea is now to set up vaccination centres so that local GPs don't have to make that decision. Who do you give the vaccine to and who doesn't get it? And first, the vaccine would be given to people who are who belong to the high-risk groups to avoid severe cases of COVID-19, and then to people who look after these people, like doctors, nurses, etc., and to other people who are exposed to the virus a lot, and then to people who work in positions that are vital to maintaining public life, like the police, etc. What's important to add is that the vaccination would not be compulsory, it would be voluntary, and the health minister believes that 2/3 of Germans would need to be vaccinated for the vaccine to be able to stop the dynamic of the virus.
OK, so that's a conversation that's been started. Jens Spahn has also repeated his warning about the need to avoid overwhelming Germany's health system. What is the current situation, Nina?
Well, we keep seeing record numbers in new infections, and when you look at the situation in hospitals, experts are saying that the situation is currently even worse than it was during the peak times in spring, because there are a lot more COVID patients in regular hospital beds, and many of them will end up in ICU. And it takes 4 weeks for the current record numbers in new infections to then translate into much higher numbers in ICU patients. And some hospitals have already exceeded their capacity. They're transferring patients to other clinics. Of course, Germany is still coping fairly well. There are currently some 8,400 free ICU beds nationwide. But if the numbers develop in the way they have done over the past weeks, this number could dwindle very fast, and that is the big concern.
OK, DW correspondent Nina Haaser, thank you. Well, of course, this is big news that everyone's looking for at the moment. I'll just repeat that. German-based pharmaceutical company BioNTech says one of the vaccines it's developing is more than 90% effective against COVID-19. So how's this affecting the markets? Well, Chelsea Delaney is our financial correspondent in Frankfurt. Welcome, Chelsea. How's this news gone down there?
It's been a huge boost for markets here in Frankfurt. The DAX was already up about 2% on the U.S. election results, but after this news came in from Pfizer and BioNTech, we saw markets really shoot up. The DAX is up almost 6% right now, and we're seeing this particularly in the stocks of things like airlines and travel companies. For example, Lufthansa, the German airline, is up about 20%. The British Airways owner IAG is up about 30%. So clearly, a lot of investors are now betting betting on some sort of return to normality in the near future. And there had been a little bit concerned because some of these trials have been halted for safety concerns that the timeline was going to get pushed further and further out. But this has really given people a lot of hope that perhaps by early next year we could start seeing this vaccine being rolled out. Still, we have some public health officials warning that even as these vaccines are approved, it likely won't hit the full population until much further out into next year. So a little bit too early to be jumping to these hopes of a new return to normality.
Thank you for that. Chelsea Delaney in Frankfurt.